And Geo, we have so many of y'all here. We're so excited to support you tonight. Hopefully, you can hear me and you can see me. And if you can do all those things, then let us know in the chat a 1 through 5 how you're feeling on your AP Human Geo test right now. Like a 5 being like, honestly, give it to me right now. I'm ready. 1 being like, I'm going to need some more time. We'll see what you got. You could use decimals too, because why not? Who cares? So while you do that, there's quite a few of you here, so this is gonna be really fun. So my name is Amanda Doyamaral. I'm the founder and CEO of Fiveable. I've been building Fiveable for the last 5 years now, and before that, I was a teacher. I taught AP Human Geo and AP World, and so this is one of my favorite subjects for sure. And I know that for many of y'all, you are potentially in 9th grade, maybe in 10th grade, but for most people who take this test, it's your first test. And so that can be very stressful and anxiety inducing. But at the end of the day, like you should just know that the first one is the hardest. It only gets easier from there. And you're in the right place. You're spending a Saturday night with us studying. So as far as I'm concerned, you're gonna be fine. And that's totally cool if you're junior, senior, also taking this. This is a very, very cool class. It's actually gonna help you a lot for other subjects as well. It's very foundational to so many other subjects. So the last thing I'll say is I definitely recommend that you take notes. This is at the end of the day, this is for you. This is for you to review. And so something you can do is we have a couple different things. One, there's a Cram hub right below the huge green button below us that will include slides and replay links and a big review packet that you can use. Or if you just want to just open a blank document right now, something that you could do is just almost take like 2-column notes where you're just like things I know, things I don't know. And that just gives you a nice to-do list of like, this side is good, this side it needs some time. So I think that'll be really helpful. So I'm really excited to hand this off to our amazing hosts. These are 2 students who have already taken this test. They know exactly what it feels like to be in your situation. And that's why like at Fiveable, we really want to center the students. And so we love having student-to-student review sessions like this because they can explain things in ways that I just can't. I don't have all the language. So they're much better than I am in so many ways. So I'm going to hand it off to them to introduce themselves and give you a little bit of an overview of the night, and we'll dive in. Take it away, ladies.
Hi guys, my name is April. I'm going to be covering Unit 1 for tonight. I am currently a junior. I took this class in freshman year, and just like you, I'm also taking some AP tests this year.
Hi guys, my name is Jessica. I'll be taking you through Unit 2. I'm a high school senior from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was a little weird, took AP Human Geo as a junior, but that's okay because you're in good hands tonight, and I'm super excited to teach you and be able to help you. So we want to welcome you to the first official Cram session of the 5 nights to review AP Human Geo. And yeah, we're just going to go through a quick intro before we get into the content for tonight. But first, before we do that, we want to remind you to think Fiveable and follow us on all of our social media platforms here. Yeah. And we'll also give a shout out to the people who are hosting the chat tonight. They're all really lovely. We couldn't do this without you guys. April and I already introduced ourselves, and we'd also like to remind you that we'll be here for 4 more nights to cover the rest of the content and go over some really important skills that are necessary for the exam. Okay, so a little bit about how tonight is going to work and how Cram finales are going to work from here forward. So we have hosts on the stage. That's going to be me and April. And tonight specifically, we're going to go over the key concepts with slides and great graphics for units 1 and 2. And then after that, we're going to review some MCQ, talk about strategies for both MCQ and FRQ, and you're going to get some really good practice with applying the content that we just went over in some like exam format with both types of questions. And we also are going to have hosts in the chat who are going to answer your guys' questions in the Q&A tab. So if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to ask them there. How the chat is going to work, it's basically going to be like a big, really friendly group chat. We're all going to be super nice to each other, help each other out, and it's going to be facilitated by our chat hosts. And of course, we're going to be taking breaks throughout so you guys don't get too fatigued. We know that it's a lot, but we're really happy that you're here, and we're going to try to pace it and make it as manageable as possible. And the replay will be available immediately after the event if you want to rewatch this. We also want to go over some community agreements together, so to make sure we're all on the same page and we can have a great time tonight. So we have 3 big things we just want to go over really quickly. 1, we just want to make sure that we're all being really supportive of each other. Let's lift each other up. It can be a really stressful time preparing for AP season. We've all been through it, but hopefully we can find a sense of community here. And the more we support each other and come together, the easier it'll be for everyone involved. 2, please be patient with us, with the people that are hosting the chats, with everyone here, because it's a lot of content, but don't worry, we have 5 nights together. So if we don't cover something that you were hoping we were going to cover, come back, because we will be covering all of the content, all of the units across 5 nights. And finally, please be kind. Just remember that everyone behind the screen right now is a real person. And again, just treat everyone with kindness and compassion and patience, and we're going to have a great time together.
So this is the agenda. The first thing is obviously the welcome, which we already did. We're going to be first going through Unit 1, then we're going to take a break. Later, we're going to go on Unit 2, take a break. And then after that, the most important part of what we learned is applying it. So we're going to be doing the FRQ practice first, and then later we're going to be doing an MCQ practice. And finally, at the end, we're just going to be doing a question and answers. So you guys can ask all your questions, and we'll be answering as we go along until it ends. The exam format, if some of you don't know, is that the MCQ will be 60 questions. It's going to be 1 hour, and it's going to be 50% of your score. Section 2 is going to be the FRQ, which is the free response question, and this is going to be 3 questions, which is going to be broken down into like sub questions or subsections, and it's going to last 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it's also going to be 50% of your score. The first question does not include any stimuli, and then question 2 includes 1 stimulus, and question 3 includes 2 stimuli. So you're going to be seeing data and or maps, which I also got when I was taking my test. This is how the exam is going to be weighed at the beginning. So Unit 1 is only going to be 8 to 10%, but Unit 2 is going to be 12 to 17%, along with every other unit. So if you're a little bit stressed about Unit 1, don't worry, because it is going to be the smallest portion of the test. Now we're going to start with Unit 1. So here are some tips before we get into the content. First, this is some foundational concepts, and you are going to have to learn how to apply some of it. So yes, if you're having if you're struggling with memorizing every definition, don't worry. You just have to really understand or grasp a concept. So let's say we're talking about absolute location, just know like, oh, absolute location is like where you are right now. So instead of having to know the exact definition. Also, we're going to focus on application with the MCQ and FRQ practice, and this Unit 1 might be embedded in an FRQ, but you won't see a full question on Unit 1 content. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the world's regions. This is like a big picture view. So one thing that you should know is that you really don't have to know every country in the world. I remember the first time I took this class that my teacher made me do like a map. with all the little countries. That's just to help you, but it's not necessary. The one thing you should know though is the regions, so kind of have an idea of where everything is in each continent. Then we have a closer look, and this is also important because if you're looking at a DTM or population pyramids, you can make assumptions based on maybe where the region is, which is important. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about, I also list at the top right corner the different sections, so like 1.1, 1.2, if you want to keep track of that. And before we get started, I do recommend you to have a notebook or something to take notes. So if you have like an iPad or somewhere you can handwrite your notes, I definitely recommend that. I also recommend a snack if you get hungry and some water if you get thirsty, because sometimes your brain might get tired and it's good to have things that will energize you. So here we're going to be starting off with the reference map. And reference maps, as you can see here on the right, do not give specific details or data of an area, but are used to have a general understanding of an area. So reference maps can be used to show subways, streets, topography. And then thematic maps, on the other hand, can be used to show the weather, population density, and statistics. So basically, thematic maps are mostly used to show more specific stats. And these maps emphasize spatial patterns or places by using data. Now we're going to be going into the different type of thematic maps, which is something you should know for your test. And the first thing I want to talk about before we get into each different type of map is how to analyze a map. So the first thing you want to take in mind is that here, as you can see in the bottom right corner of the image of the map, you're going to see a key, and you want to analyze what each color means and what percentage or number goes along with it. So for example, in chloroplast maps, these maps use color or patterns to show the distribution of a particular variable or a data set. So for this one, just make sure see 40 to 50% would be showing the red color, so you can see what states are going to be in that color. So it does use color variation. And also when you're analyzing a map, make sure to check the question and connect it back to the map. So you want to analyze the map first before reading the question, so you don't have a hard time picking the right answer choice. The next map we're going to be talking about is the dot distribution dot density map. It has two names, but you will be able to easily identify it. It uses a dot symbol to show the presence of a feature or a phenomenon. Dot maps rely on a visual scatter to show spatial pattern. So for example, here we have, let's say, US lightning deaths. As you can see in Florida, the denser it gets, that means the more lightning deaths that there has been in that state. So compared to North and South Dakota, where there's barely been any lightning death, the dots are going to be a lot more scattered. Next, we're going to be talking about cartograms. And what happens with cartograms is that it does distort the size of like a region or a state or a shape. And these maps use a particular variable, such as population, to distort the size or shape of geographic areas in order to better represent the distribution of data. So let's say you're trying to show how many, for example, here it says accumulated coronavirus cases. If one place has a lot of coronavirus cases, the state is going to get more inflated, or the area that it's emphasizing. Then here we have a physical map, and the physical map focuses on the geographic features and landforms of an area. So as you can tell in this one is like, let's say the rockier or where there's higher altitude, it's going to be red, and then it disperses out to green. And you can analyze that by looking at the key, which is very small, but like if you think about Arizona, like you're gonna think about the cliffs. And then when you think about Florida, which I live in Florida, so it's like really flat. Like if you drive here, like you won't see anything beautiful, like amazing when you're driving. Okay. The next map we're going to be talking about is a political map, and this one is designed to show governmental boundaries of countries and states. In later units, you are going to learn about the different types of ways that you can tell like a country, like geometric and all of that, but we're not going to be covering that in unit 1. Just know that this is how a political map will look, just to divide the boundaries. Then we have a proportional symbol map, and these maps use symbols such as circles or squares to represent the size or quantity of a particular variable or data set. So it alters the size and location of symbols to represent specific data. Lastly, we have one more map before this. So we have the Isoline map. This is also called an isarithmic map. So if you see it, it's basically the same. It is the same thing. It's not basically the same thing. The Isoline map has ranges of similar value filled with similar colors or patterns showing changes over space. These maps use lines to show equal intervals or changes in a particular variable or data set. And basically, these maps, you can also see this in like the weather, for example. So like in Florida, we get a lot of hurricanes. When you're looking at a hurricane on a weather map, you're going to see that the middle is like red because that's where the rain is the heaviest and the wind. And then as we go out, it's going to be lighter in color. So the rain is like dispersing and it's not as heavy. Okay. The topographic map. Topographic shows a relief of features of the Earth's surface, usually by means of contour lines to show changes in elevation. This is similar to one of the maps I had mentioned previously because it shows different levels of elevation. Lastly, this is the last one. This is a flow map. And flow maps are basically maps that show the movement of people or goods from one place to another over time. You can also use this map to show like where you flew. So let's say I'm flying out from Florida. The arrow would first start in Florida, and then if I'm going to California, it would show an arrow flying to California or going to California. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the different scales. So I was showing you different types of maps, but there's also different scales. So there is going to be two different types of scales on the maps, and there's large scale, which is used for cities and are a lot more detailed. So as you can see here, this is the New York subway system. Large scale maps are going to be a lot more specific. So usually when I was taking AP Human Geography, I would get confused and I'd be like, oh, but if it's large scale, then it should be large like the Earth. And then if it's small, then it should be like New York, but it's actually the opposite. So just keep that in mind. Large scale just means like you're zooming into a map, and then small scale is like you're zooming out on a map. And here the small scale is less detailed and it shows larger areas. So for example, I have the state of New York, which is small scale because it's not as specific. You can't really analyze a subway system from there. Lastly, one thing I want to mention is projections, and these are a way of representing the curved surface of the Earth on a flat map, because how can you get a 3D shape to be 2D? It is going to have some distortions, and these are the different types of distortions that you're going to see on projections. To make sure it fits on a paper, it might have the shape of an area, which can be distorted. The distance between two areas might be inaccurate. The relative size of different areas will be inaccurate, or the direction can be distorted. So it can have more than one distortion, or it can have only one. Next, we have the scales of analysis. So before I show you the projections, I am going to be showing you some more scales. More specifically, we have the scale of inquiry, and that is what is the best way to analyze something based on a certain topic. This goes back to what I was mentioning before when I was talking about how can we analyze a map. So if you get a question that is a little bit confusing, just remember to analyze the map before, and then you can make the inference for the question that is being asked. So here it says, let's analyze this map. And as I had mentioned before, you just look at the key first, and from the key, you can start assuming what they're trying to talk about. Lastly, there's also scale of analysis, which is observing data from a global, national, regional, or local scale. So here you can infer that the United States, which is a country, this would be a national scale of analysis. Here is a larger example of a small scale map, and when we refer to it as small scale here is to the countries. So here, this is the COVID-19 cases in the US. You can assume that this is a thematic map because it is by colors and it's not distorting any of the shapes of the states. And as you can see here, countries that have greater or equal to 985 cases of US are colored in really dark red, but then the other ones are colored in really light red, almost like a baby pink. So it is a zoomed out map to show large area on a small space. Then this is a large scale map, as I was referencing. These are the COVID-19 cases in Brooklyn. This is a large scale map because obviously you're not going to be able to see like the different boroughs in Brooklyn have this many cases. Like you wouldn't be able to analyze that if you were looking at it from the United States, like country as a whole in a map. Now we're going to look at different projections. I have 3 on the next slide, but these are the ones that you should really know for your AP Human Geography exam, which I really recommend you remember, and you remember the different types of distortions. The first one we have here is the Mercator projection, and this distorts shape and size of land masses. So it makes the land masses actually appear larger, but it does maintain the distance. And that's why it is used for navigation, because if you're like sailing from, let's say, New York to the coast of Spain, like you're gonna want to use a Mercator map because it doesn't distort the latitude and longitude lines. It's also really popular. That's what I wanted to say. The Robinson projection spreads distortion out across shape, size, and direction. The Robinson projection was actually used to fix the Mercator projection, but it also has its own distortions because obviously you can't make something 3D perfect on a 2D map. This is used to focus on the oceans, and the land sizes are smaller, while in the Mercator projection, the land sizes are a bit larger, and it's reduced to mitigate some of the distortions on the Mercator projection, as I had mentioned previously. Okay, I'm gonna slow down a little bit. Sorry, I'm going a little fast. Okay, so next we have the Fuller projection. The Goody homolosing projection and the Fuller projection both are, what are they called? They're maps that are disrupted. They're interrupted maps. So the Fuller projection does not use cardinal directions, but it does maintain the accurate size and shape of the land masses. So all the countries that you see in the Fuller projection are true to size, but that means that we do have to distort. We can't see it all like in the same space as you see in the Winkle triple projection. And then the Goody homolosing projection minimizes also, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Goody homolosing projection. Like it's so hard to pronounce, and I was actually practicing before this, but it does minimize distortion due to being an interrupted map. So it's very similar to Fuller, but they do look different based on the interrupted shape. Then we have the Winkle triple projection. Okay, when I was taking this test, the Winkle triple and the Robinson are really hard to tell apart because they basically look identical. But Jessica, can you go back to the last slide? Thanks. The Robinson projection is not as round as the Winkle triple projection, if you can go back to that one. So you're going to notice that the Winkle triple is a lot rounder. So that's the only thing, honestly, that you can keep in mind for that one. And it's also distorting the poles most. So the north and south poles, it's distorting it a lot.
Hey, April, I have a question for you. So you just shared with us a bunch of maps and a bunch of different types of projections. Do you have any tips for memorizing the differences between the maps, or like associating the names with what the maps looked like for the test? Or like, how did you do it when you were studying for the test?
So the way that I did it when I was studying for this test, honestly, was just taking MCQ questions and practicing it and analyzing the different maps, because I think that was the trickiest part. So for the thematic maps, I think it's a lot easier to do the MCQ, but then for the projections, I think it's mostly better to, I say usually understand the concepts, but for these, I think it is really important that you remember the distortions, or just try to analyze the distortions while you're looking at the map. So obviously for the Fuller projection, you can see that it's interrupted, but that it maintains the shape of everything. Yeah,
I think we can. Oh, I think we can continue on through the rest of Unit 1.
Okay. How do you determine the scale of analysis if it asks you what the scale of analysis would be to compare neighborhoods or something smaller than a city? You can use scale of analysis like literally for anything. You can use it for your school even. It's not like there's no cap to how big or small you want to analyze something. So if you want to analyze, for example, the population of your school, you can do that. You would be using a population pyramid for that. But if it's like a city or a neighborhood, you would have to take in the population. I don't know if you'd be able to put that on a map exactly, but you can ask more in the chat because, yeah. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the geographic data. There's two types of geographic data. There's qualitative research, which is information that is more opinion-based. So for example, if you have a survey or an interview, these are more opinion-based. So let's say you wanted to write an article and you want to interview like a dermatologist, for example, that would be qualitative research because they're giving you their opinion. And then quantitative research is information that is more fact-based rather than opinion-based. So if you're checking the analytics of maybe a post that you put on Instagram, that would be marketing data because it's not opinion-based. It's literally like a fact. Both the homolocing projection and the Fuller map, since they're interrupted maps, it does show an accurate size of all the land masses. Now we're going to be talking about more geographic data, but geographic data is any data that is associated with a specific location on the Earth's surface. So first we're going to be talking about the name of places, and then there are many different types of places that have names, including cities, towns, villages, regions, countries, and natural features. So for example, I live here in Miami, Florida. There's also addresses, and then there's also terrain features. Terrain features are the natural features of the Earth's surface, such as mountains, valleys, rivers, lakes, and oceans. So for example, Florida has nothing, doesn't have any mountains. Maybe might have a river, I'm not really sure. It does have a lake though, Lake Okeechobee, shout out. Okay, next we have land use patterns, and land use patterns refer to the way that land is used or managed within a specific area. So first, we have industrial, which is land used for manufacturing. This can be a warehouse, a factory. So if you see a lot of offices, that can be for industrial use. Then we have residential, which is like your home where you are right now. You might be in your house watching this. That would be a residential land use. We also have agricultural, which is land used for growing crops or raising animals. And then we have commercial, which is land used for business or for commerce. Lastly, we also have natural land use pattern, which is land left in its natural state. So for example, here we have the Everglades, and that's like a national site. So you can't really mess with any of the properties there. Then we have the geographic information system. And then this is specialized software tools that allow users to map, analyze, and visualize spatial data. Information is collected through GPS to create layered maps, and it also allows us to analyze different types of data in terms of their location. The one thing I did want to mention was in geographic data, going back to what I was previously mentioning, was also population statistics, which is data that can be used, and there's also a lot of others, but you don't have to know those for the test. And also for the population statistics, just make sure that you know that what I mean by that is like something you're going to learn in Unit 2, which is the birth rate, death rate, the age structure, and total population. Now we're going to be talking about the power of geographic data. This is 1.3. So maps can actually be used to represent a wide range of spatial information and to show the location of specific points or features. Spatial information is information about physical locations and the spatial relations between objects or features in space. I also wanted to mention from the last slide that there are two other types of collection of data, and that's the GPS, which is the Global Positioning System, which is a satellite-based navigation system that allows users to determine their precise location, velocity, and time anywhere on Earth. So sometimes when your phone asks you like, oh, can we use your location? Like, that's global positioning system. It has played significant role in the development of technology and industries, because obviously, like right now, imagine having to use a map when you're driving, like in the old days. Like, we don't have to do that anymore. So thank you for that. But one thing I did want to mention also is that if you don't know well the GPS, that's okay. It can be a little bit confusing, but I'm pretty sure that it will not come up on the test from the last time I took it, but obviously it always changes. So if it's a little confusing to you, that's okay. There's also one more type of way to collect data, and that's remote sensing, and that's use of satellite or aerial imagery to collect data about the Earth's surface.
Okay, so before we move on, I think we're going to try to slow it down a little bit. So we're going to have some chat questions shared on the screen, and then we're going to answer them for you.
Okay, how do we know? Oh, it went away. Okay. How do we know the difference between both GIS and GPS? So GPS is a satellite-based navigation system, and then what happens with GIS is that GIS is going to it's going to be like layers, so it's a little bit different. I think we can go on to the next slide. Okay, well, actually, now we're going to be taking a break, so that's great if you really feel like you need one.
Yeah, so we'll be taking a 5-minute break now, so you can catch up on your notes or get something to eat or anything, and then we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Awesome. And then I can also do I'll do a cram quiz in a little bit. So just for all of you to know, you can hit go on the timer. You two can take a break. And so we'll definitely slow it down a little bit. I know we're all very excited. Unit 1 doesn't have, it has a lot of content, but it's also like not a huge part of it. And so part of the reason why we're going a little fast is like, you know, we can just kind of go through Unit 1 and then get on to bigger and better things. Let's see. Maybe in the chats while we're on a break, we could just start talking about like which units are you having the hardest time with? Are there certain concepts? This type of information is really helpful for us because we can then, when we get there, we can definitely like really slow down. Unit 5. Unit 6, Unit 4. Yeah, this is good. Yep, totally makes sense. Yeah, see how most people Unit 1 is not the issue. So we'll have plenty of time to get through it all. My personal favorite unit is Unit 4, if anyone was curious. I like Unit 4. I just find it to be interesting. The political unit. Who knows what the FRQ will be this year? Or FRQs. So you can also post any questions you have in the Q&A tab, and our awesome hosts are answering them in the comments on there. And so you can check your question and see if it's gotten an answer. Make sure you get some water. Make sure you've got, you know, a snack or something. Use this time to get whatever you need. It's a 3-hour event, so we'll end at 10 p.m. Eastern. So we've got about 2.5 hours more. So we'll add some breaks throughout as we go. So we have about 3 more minutes here. Just kind of help us out. And then I'll also just like remind you that the button below, the Cram Hub is there. And in the Cram Hub, you can get the slides. So these slides, exactly. So if it does feel like it's going too fast, you can open up the slides and, you know, take notes later on as well. And there's also a review packet, so you could take notes directly onto that. But the best thing that you can do is like, don't try to take notes in a way that's like trying to write everything down, because that will just be stressful for you and you won't necessarily like, you know, really process all of it. The best thing you can do is just take use this like time here to just kind of give yourself that like to-do list, you know? So you sort of write the word of like, we're talking about this word. Do I know it? Do I not? You know, you can kind of give yourself that list, and then you know later to go back and check that one out. Ooh, chips and salsa. Sounds good. Thank you, Emery. Yes, the slides are on the button. Yep, so we're going to finish up Unit 1 in just a few minutes. We'll do a Unit 1 quiz, and then we will jump into Unit 2. For Unit 2, we're going to talk about population pyramids, the DTM, migration. There's lots of stuff in Unit 2 to talk through, and then we're also going to do a practice FRQ on Unit 2. So there's lots of Unit 2 stuff coming your way. Yeah, let us know what other snacks you've got. What do we got? We have brownies with ice cream. I'm jelly. So good. Cupcakes, scrambled eggs. What is the most important unit? So AP Human Geography is kind of unique from APs, where you get, out of the 7 units, 6 of them are weighted the exact same. So Unit 1 is the only one that you should kind of deprioritize, but the other ones are all equally as important in terms of like how will they show up in the multiple choice questions, FRQs. Yeah, so there's like one least important, but there isn't like a most important. All right, y'all want to come back up? Welcome back. Welcome back. While you go through each slide, just make sure to slow down. We're going to slow down a little bit just to, you know, give ourselves the time we need to go through everything, and so that all the brains of every audience member doesn't explode. All right, as soon as we're done with Unit 1, I'll come back up and we can do the quiz.
Okay. One thing that someone had asked before, which I can just repeat again, was if I could go back and restate what remote sensing was, because I think I did go a little faster. And remote sensing is a way to collect data. It's the use of satellite or aerial imagery to collect data about the Earth's surface. And it's used in areas that are unsafe or inaccessible. So if they want to capture an image from maybe like a war-torn country that they aren't able to go there themselves and capture the data, they can use the satellite or aerial imagery. For example, you can assess damage caused by natural disasters also. So now we're going to be talking about different spatial concepts. I remember learning this, and it was actually pretty, like, it's relatively easy once you have different examples. At first it sounds a little confusing, but you will get to it. So absolute distance is describing distance in quantitative terms. For example, how many miles away is something, like, oh, how many miles away are we from West Palm Beach? That would be like probably more than 90 miles. I can't remember, but just for an example. And then relative distance is describing distance in qualitative terms. So instead of using like miles, kilometers, you'd be using like minutes, seconds, hours. So how far away is something? And it's like, oh, you can be like, oh, it's about 30 minutes or about an hour away. Absolute location is using longitude and latitude coordinates. So this spot will never change on Earth. I did mention this at the beginning of when we started. I was like, oh, this is like this where I am right now. Like this is never going to change. This is like my absolute location. While absolute distance can change because it really depends on where you are, and same with relative distance. Relative location is using landmarks in an area to describe the location. So for example, if you don't know the 2 streets that you're in, like let's say you're on 41st and 114th, and you don't know that, you're like, oh, where's the Taco Bell? It's like, it's right next to the KFC. So you can use landmarks to kind of remember, especially if you already drive at this age. You can use landmarks instead of memorizing the addresses.
Yeah, and we can't see any of you right now, but we're curious as to where you are. So if you want to practice with relative location, you can go ahead and type in the chat where you are in relation to two or one landmark. So like I'm from California, but I live east of San Francisco. So my landmark is San Francisco. So that's me explaining how relative location works in my case. So what about you guys? Go ahead and type in the chat where you guys are from using relative location.
From when I took the exam, if they showed pictures of maps, it was all different types of maps, but it was mainly like thematic maps, and maybe you would get like 1 or 2 projections on the 60 questions, or maybe on an FRQ you might get like a thematic map. Or actually something as remote sensing. Like once, I remember one test they put like an image and it had dots. It was nothing else. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you guys, because I remember everyone was like confused. I think we can move on, right? To the next slide.
I was about to bring that up. I'm seeing some really great answers to my question in the chat, and someone said they're south of Disney. So jealous. But I bet it's really hot there all the time. That's a push or pull factor that we're going to talk about later.
Okay, so here is an example of absolute location. This would be someone's absolute location in Portland, Maine, and you can see that it's using coordinates from the longitude and latitude. So if you really want to know where you are located on the Earth right now, just go on your GPS and then put it, and it'll show you your coordinates. You can go on like Google Maps. Now here we have the difference, which is relative location. So relative from Portland, Maine is 112 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts. So just as Jessica had mentioned, think of a place that you are relatively located from. And you can comment it in the chat. So for example, me, I'm like 6 miles away from, I don't know, Miami Lakes. Okay, now we're going to be talking about different spatial concepts. I do think that these are really important for being able to analyze different things or make inferences for future units. So it's something that you should take into account. Distance decay is the effect of distance on cultural and spatial interactions. So the further that something is apart, the less interaction that will occur. This does not occur as much thanks to space-time compression. So as technology begins to improve, distance decay is going to mitigate. It's not going to be as impactful. So let's say, like, if you guys have read like Pride and Prejudice, which is based in the 1800s, you would know that in the story, like, it takes like 3 days to get a letter to at least know if someone got somewhere. But now you can just send a text, and that takes like 2 seconds. An example of this is something that maybe some of you can relate to is, think of a long distance relationship and a relationship between two people that are neighbors. How would this affect their communication? So obviously the communication against long distance relationship, like, they're gonna have to FaceTime and stuff, and it's going to be a lot harder in their relationship compared to people that live right next to each other, because they can see each other every day and it wouldn't be as damaging to the relationship. Then we have space-time compression, and space-time compression reduces the impact of distance decay because of the advance in technology, which increases globalization and a sense of connectivity. So think back to how social media has made the world more interconnected. So it's like through social media, we can learn about different cultures. So maybe if I didn't know about a culture, let's say in South Africa, there's someone from South Africa sharing their story on Instagram or Twitter, and I can learn about their culture through there. And that's a great thing about space-time compression. Now we're going to be talking about different spatial concepts. So the first one is pattern, and that is going to be the geometric placement of objects in space. So where are things located? Then we have space, which is the physical gaps between objects. In my opinion, I don't think you have to really know these definitions the way they are, because I think all of you really know like the definition for space, but this is more of a geographer's term. So the physical gaps between objects, like how far away am I from this water bottle? And then we also have flow, which is the movement of goods, people, and services from one place to another. Then we have place, which is creating a location that has certain characteristics. So we have a physical place which would be rivers, climates, mountains, etc. That would be like, for example, in Puerto Rico, if you're in a rainforest, then some of its physical characteristics would be the river, the trees in the rainforest. And then cultural would be certain characteristics of a place, which would be the religion, the age structure, language, and there's a lot more different examples. So let's say that a cultural characteristic of Miami is that like everyone here is Hispanic and speaks Spanish. That's like something that's very unique to Miami compared to a lot of other cities in the United States. So you can kind of think of Miami like that and remember it in that way.
I think we had a question before we move on, like just to clarify, if you want to go back over the distance between absolute and relative location. I think there's a question on the screen. If you just want to clarify the difference between absolute and relative location again, there is a question that popped up on the screen.
Yeah, definitely. So absolute location is more like the longitude and latitude coordinates. So that's like absolute is exactly where you are, and relative is like kind of where you are. It's like it's not really exactly where you are. So let's say you want to go to McDonald's, you're relatively close to McDonald's. You're not at McDonald's. If you were at McDonald's, that would be your absolute location. Your relative location would be about how far is it. That would be your distance too. So I might be like 5 minutes away in car.
Yeah, so like absolute location, like April said, is longitude and latitude doesn't really change, but relative location, it's really dependent on other things around you. So you need knowledge of like other things around you to be able to describe where you are.
So would Disneyland being in Florida create place or a sense of place? You can say that would be a place because it does kind of have like its own characteristics that you can tie in part of Orlando, Florida. Okay, I think we can. Oh no, not Disneyland. I was talking about Disney World. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to be talking about human environmental interactions. So there are two types of human environmental interactions. We have environmental possibilism, which is the physical environment only limits the range of possible human actions, but does not completely determine the choices human make. And then environmental determinism, which is the physical environment which completely determines human behavior and culture. So example, like how are people using the resources around them, especially let's say you live like in the forest, like in Puerto Rico. I'm from Puerto Rico, that's why I keep bringing it up. But if you're to say how it would determine what choices you're making, that would be like environmental possibilism. And then environmental determinism would be how it shapes your culture.
I'll add in my own example of environmental possibilism. So I live in California and it's like super hot. It gets like 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer, right? And so if I didn't have technology, if I was completely dependent on the environment, I would probably die. But because humans are not fully at the whim of their environment, because we have technology like air conditioning, thank God for air conditioning, I'm able to live in more places that wouldn't be exactly hospitable without this technology.
I also saw that question. Has environmental determinism been disproven? Both of these have not been, or that I know have been disproven, because you can show examples of your everyday life for both of them. So example, environmental determinism, it kind of shapes around, like it shapes how you live in an environment. So if you're living, for example, maybe Antarctica, the way you live and the way you adjust to the climate, like wearing more layers, for example, that would be different to how many layers you would wear here in Miami, because the environment is changing how you're going to live in that place.
I think that it's a little bit complicated. if you study, this is a bit tangential, but if you study like political philosophy, environmental determinism kind of has some really like racist implications, saying that like because people that especially lived closer to the equator, to European thinkers, that they were like mentally less developed, and that racist element or Darwinism and really ties to scientific racism has been certainly disproven over time, if that's what you're referring to, that where people live and their climate like impacts their intelligence somehow. But really in the modern world that we live in, yes, environment impacts how I live, but also I can use technology to change my environment to make it more hospitable. So the way we live now, it's a combination of possibilism and determinism, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that too. Like they kind of go hand in hand. We can go on to the next slide. So lastly, I think this is one of the last slides, and that is regionalization, which is a process of dividing a large area into smaller regions or territories, often based on shared characteristics or common interests. For example, we have the formal regions, and formal regions are often based on a physical or cultural feature that is easily identifiable and can be clearly defined. So that would be like political regions such as counties and provinces, or statistical regions based on a census. Then we have the functional or nodal. So the reason I put it in parentheses is because sometimes they will ask you a region, but they will ask you in a different like way. So they might not be like, what is this, like formal region? They might say this is a uniform region. So for example, functional nodal is a geographic area that is organized around a center point. And an example of this would be a city and its surrounding suburbs. So think about Chicago and its surrounding suburban community. Lastly, we have vernacular or perceptual regions, or perceptual. And this would be like the American South, the Bible Belt, and the Middle East, because it's really subjective to a person's experience or the cultural meanings of the people who live within the region. But we can't really, that's why you've never really been able to define like the Middle East, like what countries pertain to it, because some say they are part of it, some say they aren't part of it.
Yeah, and because vernacular regions are so like personal, we would love to hear what you think about them or any examples that you have. Like for me, I'm from the Bay Area, so I would consider the California Bay Area to be of my vernacular region. So if you have any examples of your own, go ahead and put them in the chat right now, and we'd love to see them.
Someone asked a question is if they ask about specific people on the AP exam, and from last time I took it, they don't. Like, I don't think you have to remember any specific geographers, just like the name. So like the Mercator projection, you don't have to remember who created it, but it's kind of implied in the projection, the Mercator projection. Okay, so this is one of the type of regions, and this is the formal. I had already mentioned it, but these are examples so you can see them. These are the borders that are really easily defined, and this is used to be able to tell the difference between states or countries, or really just dividing them so you can see where the territories end. Also, this is an example of a thematic map. Here we have functional, which is defined by a central node. So as you can see here, they have like the different, I'm pretty sure those are basketball teams, right? How here we have like the Miami Heat, and then we have the Lakers. And I am assuming that this map would be on how many fans they have spread across, or how far people are going to support them. And then we can move on to the last slide, which is a last example of the perception or vernacular region, which is a place that people believe exists as part of the cultural identity. And here you can see an example of this. I think also maybe New England. Does anyone know? Type in the chat. Do you know if that is a vernacular region or like a formal region? Like it's clearly defined. Because I remember I was debating with my cousin on if Maryland was part of it, which I searched it up and I think it said it wasn't. So type that in the chat. So a lot of people are saying it's vernacular. And in my opinion, I think so too, but some people might be against that. Okay, so apart from that, we have the big ideas of Unit 1. And that is the foundational concepts of geography. So make sure you know a location, which we just explained, which is relative location, absolute location. And then knowing your place, distance, time, space-time compression, distance decay. And remember, maps, you don't have to remember the specific names, but just be able to recognize how they are different. So remember how thematic maps are different. Try to tell between the different distortions of the projections, and also know your regions. I think that is also really important because it is going to tie into the later units, especially the political ones. So remember your region, your functional maps, your functional regions, your formal regions, and then your vernacular regions. And then we have a little question here, which is, out of these big ideas, what can we help you with further, or what do you want us to explain again?
So we'll give you some time to think about it and then respond in the chat. And then if we see big patterns, we'll go over or re-explain some things.
Mm-hmm. So a functional region is basically just a geographical area that is defined by a flow of goods, services, information, or other resources between the places within the region. So as I had previously mentioned, it would be like Chicago and its surrounding suburbs, or maybe even like the boroughs of New York City. Oh, here in the chat, they're asking about regionalization, which if you go back to the last slide, I put a term there that if you really want to know it, you can. You just have to understand the 3 regions. So I think it's in the last, like the 4th, the one with all the terms. So regionalization is the process of dividing a large area into smaller regions, territories, or if it's based on shared characteristics or common interests. So that's why we were talking about like vernacular, like it's based on common characteristics, while formal is more divided into a large area into smaller regions. So the United States, it might have different states, and those are the borders. Amanda, would you like to say something?
Man, Unit 1 is just like, it's easy to feel like you're buried in different types of maps and stuff, but I'm gonna move us into the quiz, because at the end of the day, remember, Unit 1 is only going to be a couple of multiple choice questions, so we don't want to like get too bogged down from it. Cool. Ready for quiz time? All right. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to play the Fiveable quiz together. So I put together a couple questions about Unit 1 to just help us review. These are not like, although I guess like human geography, multiple choice are kind of trivia-esque, but they are, these are just like remembering concepts basically. So these are not like AP style in a sense. So you can go ahead and join the quiz. You can use the QR code on the screen and join from your phone, or I will put Unit 1 quiz on a new button. Here we go. All right, and I'm going to play the music. Oops. Can you hear the music? You can't hear it, right?
I don't think we can hear the music.
Okay, I'll play the next one. All right, let's start quiz. Okay, wait, let me unshare just to get the music going, because we've got to get the music going. I'm coming back. And we still don't hear the music. That's such a bummer. All right. Well, we've got a whole bunch of people answering this question.
There's the button that says Unit 1 quiz is like so they can join, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of people are saying like where the link is. So if you see the button there, you can join the quiz.
Thank you. All right, let's reveal this answer. So distortion is especially severe and apparent on small scale maps. We got this one was like this is a spicy question, so there were a lot of incorrects here. Could you guys help explain why this is correct? Why do small scale maps have a lot of distortion? Whoops. How did it get so small? There we go.
When it says the distortion is especially severe and apparent on small scale maps, so remember the small scale maps are showing like bigger areas, and then the large scale maps are showing smaller areas. So if you wanted to analyze something really specific, you're not going to be able to see it on a small scale map.
Perfect. Exactly. All right, let me just quickly try refreshing to get the music. Gosh, such a bummer. Okay, that's the next one. Next question. Ah, there we go. Now you can hear it, right? Can you hear it?
Yep, I can hear it.
Okay, great. There we go. I'll come back on. This song has been stuck in my head just like for days now. So, what is the name of the dividing line between the Earth's east and west hemispheres? I don't know. Music isn't all that bad. And the answer here is the prime meridian. 71% of you got this right. Good job. You may get some questions like this. Remember, the prime meridian is totally like man-made, human-made. You could, because you're just dividing it in half this way, so you could just theoretically choose anywhere to be 0. So it's very Eurocentric because, well, the Europeans made it. All right, next question. I'll keep the music low. All right. The acquisition of data about Earth's surface from a satellite orbiting a planet. I'm supposed to say planet. Or from another long distance method is. I'll turn the music down. All right. All right, I'm going to reveal this answer. Justin, I really want to help me explain this one. Remind us again, what is remote sensing?
I can tell you what remote sensing is. It's the use of satellite or aerial imagery to collect data about the Earth's surface. So this is especially used in places that are unsafe or inaccessible because they're taking images from above through a satellite. So, example, like a natural disaster, taking pictures.
Perfect. All right, let's keep going. News of an earthquake in China reaches the US in less than 15 minutes. This is an example of. Loving all these emojis flying around. right, about to reveal the answer. Woo, y'all killed this one. Time-space compression. So remember, news travels so much faster now than it used to. That's why you've got news of an earthquake in China reaching the US and probably even just minutes, seconds. People will know from online. Good job, everyone. All right. Poverty in the Canadian province of British Columbia. What scale of analysis would this most likely require if you were going to study poverty in that province? All right. The answer is regional. So in this case, regional would be really helpful because the Canadian province of British Columbia is a formal region. Yeah, it's like a state. And so in this case, it's like local isn't necessarily useful in that sense. Like you may be studying things locally there, but that's not really a scale of analysis in this case. All right, 2 more. Then we're going to be in on Unit 2. How do you know if it's regional or national? Which is an example of a perceptual region? All right. The answer is the South. There are oftentimes questions about these on the test where they'll use the South as an example because it's not formal. It's debated which one is, that's a perception. It's like people have an idea of where the South is, but it's not, there isn't necessarily, like you could debate, some of the states. Not official. And it's not really a node. It's sort of like, there's no like center of it. It's like, what is it that counts as these things? All right, last one. Hope this one's like this one will just really test you if you didn't get that last one right. Very similar questions. Maybe you've seen this question. I've been playing practice quizzes on Fiveable. Mm-hmm. All right, reveal answer. People's feelings and attitudes. Correct. Good job. So shared cultural values is sort of similar, but it's not necessarily like, in this case, it's almost like D is a better answer. All right. So on your screen, you can look at your answers and kind of see what you got wrong. And we'll do another quiz after Unit 2 when we go through it. So I'll bring Jessica and Avril back on stage. That was fun. Good job. We'll play more as we go.
Before we move on to Unit 2, I was seeing a lot of questions that, since we did the quiz, I didn't get to answer. And one thing that I did want to mention is because a lot of people were confused between the difference of GPS and the GIS. And one thing is that the GPS is mainly used to find an exact location, while GIS is used to record information on maps. So that's like the main difference between the two. And then another thing is that remote sensing was asked again, and it's remote sensing is the use of satellite or aerial imagery, which I think I did mention it in the questions.
Okay, so I'll reshare the slides right now. And I think we have a break, another 5-minute break. So we'll be starting that shortly. And then when you come back from your break, you can get a little snack, some water, use the restroom. We'll be going over Unit 2.
Also, one thing I wanted to mention is that if you want to practice more AP style questions after the Cram, College Board has the progress checks, so those have really specific like AP style questions for Unit 1 and all the other units.
Okay, welcome back. That was the end of our 5-minute break, and now we're gonna get into some Unit 2. So first, we just went over Unit 1. That's basically the foundation of everything else to come in AP Human Geography. And Unit 2 is kind of the first, I guess, thematic section. So we're going to be talking a lot about population and migration, but obviously this is reliant on what you learned in Unit 1 as well. So you're gonna need to apply some of the concepts that you just learned about. And again, I encourage you to take notes. If you want me to slow down, go faster, just let us know in the chat, and the chat host will let me know, and I'll try to adjust for you guys as well. Yeah. And the way that I'm going to be organizing this is roughly like how Avril did it with like each section. So I don't have the sections labeled, but it roughly follows the CED that the College Board puts out. So we're hitting all of the major concepts. And we're going to be talking about population, and then the DTM, and then migration at the very end. And one of the big questions, at least in the population section, is, well, why do people live the way that they do and where they do? It seems like a really simple question, but it's actually not. And this is what the population section, the beginning of it, tries to explore. Because where people choose to live certainly is not random. It's the farthest thing from random. People are very intentional of where they live and want to live for two major reasons: physical factors and human factors. So for physical factors, you can think of anything that's part of the natural environment that can either benefit human life and human society and make it advantageous to live somewhere, or be detrimental to human life. So one example would be climate. Let's say that you have a pretty moderate climate if you live in like British Columbia of Canada. It's like 60 degrees Fahrenheit there all year round. Sometimes it rains, but that's really good for human life because it's not too extreme. Whereas if you take somewhere like Algeria that has lots of its land part of the Sahara Desert, that's really not the best climate for human life to be living in. And the same thing goes for access to water, natural resources. Humans are dependent on these things to live. Like, we all need water to drink, but also natural resources to build technology and to gather food. And so living near places that have more natural resources, that explains why humans choose to live in some places over others. And finally, certain landforms like large bodies of water or the mountains can be really advantageous for the creation of human society because they can serve as barriers from outside populations that would want to attack them. And so all of these physical factors explain why it's more advantageous to live in some places more than others. And human factors also play into this as well. And this will relate to when we talk about in migration, push and pull factors. So let's say that, okay, I'm going to brag about California for a second. Did you know that California has the 5th largest GDP in the world? That's pretty cool, but I'm a Californian. And so human factors like the economy make some places like California a really attractive place to live. Whereas if you live in some places that have not as great of an economy, or their economic standing and economy is a lot harder to make a living in, like if they have a more agricultural based economy or operating in a lower economic sector, that may actually be what we are later going to call a push factor. It's less advantageous to live there and less attractive to live there. Same thing goes for political or cultural aspects. Let's say that you're a religious minority. Let's say that you're part of like the Uyghur population living in China that is being like persecuted right now. That is something that it's a human factor that makes you not want to live there if you're part of that religious minority. Whereas if you're part of the majority, you would actually, this would be a human factor, a political or culture one. If you feel part of a group, you would want to live there and want to move there. And the same thing goes for historical factors as well. Like if a place is of historical significance, this impacts the population or why people may want to choose to live there. And next, we're going to talk about density. So density is important when looking at and wanting to describe populations and how the population is distributed across an area. And it's important that you know these three things because once we apply this with what we learned, what April talked about in maps, we can see that it's knowing how to talk about density and the different types of density are really important to be able to analyze and understand maps that you're going to need to show the College Board on the AP exam. So the first type of density is really simple. It's probably what you think about and probably what you learned in like maybe science class or something. It's called arithmetic density, and it's the simple average of people, all the people living in a certain area, so like all the people living in the state of California divided by the amount of land in that area, like square miles or acres, or whatever unit of land you're using. Straightforward, pretty simple. You've heard about it before. I'm sure you know it. The second type is called physiological density. And this is important because the amount of land you have kind of becomes obsolete if you can't make food or grow food on that land. So this is it takes the number of people living in an area divided by the units of the number of people living in an area divided by a unit of arable land, or it's like how many people per unit of arable land in an area. To give you an example of this, I want to go back to Algeria. So Algeria is, again, a lot of the state is made up of the Sahara Desert, and that land really isn't arable. And so the physiological density of Algeria would be a lot higher than its arithmetic density, because there's a lot less land to work with when you're only considering the arable land, or the land that you can grow crops on. The last type is called agricultural density, and this is the number of farmers per unit of arable land. And typically, we're going to talk about the economic sectors later in Unit 7, so stay tuned for that. But if you have an economy that's more agricultural based and you have a lot more farmers, you're typically going to have a higher agricultural density than a place that operates within higher economic sectors, like that does things more with computers, and they import a lot of their food because they don't have as many farmers because they're in a higher economic sector. And there are benefits and disadvantages to having both higher and lower density. So one example of a kind of a detriment to living in an area with lower density, this typically aligns with more rural areas, is that you have fewer services. And one example of this is, at least in America, is within the Rust Belt. So Dayton, Ohio, which is kind of sometimes known as the capital of the Rust Belt, really lacks some services and some essential services and infrastructure. And so what was happening, because so many people were leaving that area, there wasn't enough money to keep essential programs like fire stations and police and like first responders open and operating. So sometimes it would take up to an hour for these first responders to respond in areas of the Rust Belt. And so this shows how areas of lower density have fewer services, and the services might not be as high. So just remember that. Think about Ohio, think about the Rust Belt when asked about consequences of population distribution and consequences of density. On the other hand, a detriment to living in a place that is high density is the spread of disease. Because if you're living really close to other people, it's kind of common sense. But if I get sick and I'm so close to others, I'm just spreading my disease everywhere. And then everyone's going to get sick, and there's so many people around. We're all just going to be sick together, and it's not going to be great because people are in much closer contact with one another. That is, the spread of disease is much more quick. Same thing with pollution. Areas of higher density tend to be more urban, and so they tend to use more means of transportation that release more pollutants. And so if you think of places like LA or even some larger cities in China, you'll know that the smog there and the air quality is actually pretty bad because of how high density it is. And finally, another term to note is carrying capacity. We're going to get into this a little bit more when we talk about Thomas Malthus, but carrying capacity is essentially the number of people that an area can sustain without causing harm, can sustain healthily without causing harm to the natural environment. And if you'll look at the graph right here, to the right side, the horizontal line, or K, that's carrying capacity. So at some point, we're going to have overpopulation, and the population is going to exceed what the natural land can provide for us, and we're going to have the problem.
So I have a question for Jessica, and it's about agricultural density. It's something that you guys might question too, because I did question it when I was taking this class. And it's, how can agricultural density change in an area? So how can we change having more farmers in arable lands or having less farmers in arable land?
If you look at it like broad scale, agricultural density typically is going to like decrease as a country develops like technologically and increases through the economic sectors, because you become like lower primary economic sector is like dealing with the farmers and dealing with agriculture and growing crops and stuff. But as technology increases and you start doing other things to make money and start becoming more like interconnected with other states and countries, like a country like the United States, our primary means of making money isn't growing crops. It's doing other things like education, working in government, tertiary, quaternary things, or tertiary, quaternary economic sectors. So as I would say that as a country progresses, agricultural density decreases. I mean, obviously, another way that agricultural density can change is also if something happens to the arable land. If we have a fire or something, that's obviously going to impact this, because the amount of arable land is going to decrease temporarily. I saw a question on the screen. Do we need to remember these formulas for the test? I would say that you do. You don't. They're just pretty simple. Just think about like what we're dividing by what. So like farmers by arable land and physiological people by arable land. You can generally remember what density is. So like what arithmetic density is simply. It's just people per land. And physiological and agricultural are just different variations of that, different types of people over different types of land. Hope that helps. Okay, so I think we're good to move on. Finally, I saw some requests earlier for this. Here's the nice population pyramid. I hope you're excited. So a population pyramid displays trends of population growth, of birth and deaths, and the distribution of ages of a population of a country, like over time. And so a population displays three main things: the age distributions that I just talked about, sex ratios, and dependency ratios. You can see on your screen that this population pyramid of Yemen is broken up into iterations of 5 years. These are called cohorts. So like each age group is of 5 years. And then that can be largely grouped together to create three bigger groups: pre-reproductive ages, 0 to 14, like typically before you're having children; reproductive age, 15 through 44, and then post-reproductive age, 45 and up. You'll also see that, so that's age distribution is broken up horizontally, and vertically, if you split it in half, we have it based on sex. So males on the left and females on the right. And this is important because sometimes a population pyramid is going to look like really wonky, like you're going to have an influx of males in a certain age group, or you're going to have like a lacking males in a certain age group. And this can make you wonder, and you want to be able to analyze these. Like, is this caused due to some antinatalist policies that are causing like sex selective abortions, like that happen in China? Now they have a problem with having not enough women, essentially. Or this can also be caused by war. If you see a chunk of typically younger men missing from the population, these are just some signs to look out for that you want to be able to analyze. And finally, dependency ratios shows the ratio of how many people that are either too young or too old to work compared to the number of people within the working population. And We're going to talk about the demographic transition model in a second, but we've related population pyramids and what they can look like based on each stage of the demographic transition model. So you'll see that in stage 1, which currently there are no countries in stage 1. But if there were to be any countries in stage 1, their population pyramid would look like this. It would have a super, super wide base because you have a high birth rate, lots of babies being born, but it would be super tall and super skinny because the death rate is so high and the life expectancy is so low. You can't expect many people to live to be old. And you can almost see that it's concave on the sides because of just how extreme the difference is between the high birth rate and the high death rate. Secondly, stage 2 over here, it looks more like a pyramid, so it deserves the name. Again, you'll see that birth rate's still pretty high, but the sides of the shape are starting to fill in. Death rate is still high. Life expectancy is getting a little longer, which is why you see more people living in the reproductive age and even a little bit more like post-reproductive. But still, not a ton of people are making it to the top to be 65 and older. Thirdly, we have stage 3, where you have moderate population growth. The birth rate is starting to slow down along with the death rate, which slowed down a little bit in stage 2. And as a result, life expectancy is increasing and you get this more like rounded shape. It kind of looks like a round version of SpongeBob, I guess, if you saw that one version of SpongeBob where he's like round. And so it typically like starts to look a little bit more uniform, at least horizontally. And this shows that population growth is happening, but it's more moderate. And you'll notice like the base of it, of the pre-reproductive ages, is about as wide as the reproductive and post-reproductive ages, which is not something we see in stage 1 or 2. And just to quickly mention, in stage 2, the shape of this indicates that we are having rapid population growth because lots of babies are being born because the death rate is slightly decreasing, but the birth rate has not fallen yet. So we're getting a big population boom. Finally, stage 4, it should look about like, this kind of looks like stage 4/stage 5. Stage 4 should look the most uniform of all. It'll look like almost like a rectangle, kind of like how stage 3 looks. We have low population growth, low birth rate, low death rate, and it should look the most uniform. I say that stage 4 looks a little bit like stage 5 because in stage 5 of the demographic transition model, the death rate is surpassing the birth rate. And so what that looks like is the bottom, the base of the pyramid is actually going to be skinnier than the top of it. And it looks really unstable, and it kind of is. We're going to be going over the stages of the demographic transition model in a second, but just to answer the question on the screen, there are some countries in stage 5. I believe like Japan is definitely one of them, South Korea, which is having problems with its population right now, and Italy as well are some good examples. But Japan is definitely the poster child of countries in stage 5 for a number of reasons. Okay.
I just to pop in and say I saw a question a lot of people were asking were examples of the different stages. And just for stage 3, an example would be Mexico, stage 4, an example would be United States, and stage 2, an example could be Yemen. Stage 1, there's no countries in stage 1 at the moment.
Yep, and we're about to go over the DTM, so we'll cover that right now, after we go over some important vocab to understand the DTM. Apologies for how many words are on the slide, but it's really important that you know what all of these mean. They're probably going to be abbreviated later, but it's just really foundational knowledge to understand the DTM. So first, the total fertility rate is the average number of children that would be born to a woman in country, assuming that every woman lived through her childbearing years, or the reproductive age that we said is about 15 through 49. The crude birth rate is the number of births occurring in an area per 1,000 people in 1 year of a country. And this, along with the crude death rate, are what were the two probably most important vocab words from this slide, because that's essentially what the DTM looks at: birth rate versus death rate and what that means for population growth. Infant mortality rate is the number of deaths among babies occurring between their birth and their first birthday, or who do not live to experience their first birthday, for each 1,000 live births in a given year. And we'll look at how trends of infant mortality change or typically decrease as we increase through the stages of the DTM. And crude death rate, like I said, it's the same as crude birth rate, except we're looking at the number of deaths occurring in an area in a year per 1,000 people in a country. Okay, one more slide of vocab, and then we get to the fun part. So zero population growth, or ZPG, is when the birth rate equals the death rate. So because no more people are dying than being born, no more people are being born than dying, the population is stable, it's zero, it doesn't grow. Negative population growth, on the other hand, is what happens when the death rate surpasses the birth rate. So more people are dying in a year in a country than are being born. And so that means the population is going to shrink, actually. And spoiler alert, this is really connected to stage 5 of the DTM. And finally, the rate of natural increase is the percentage at which a country's population is growing or declining without taking into account how the population is changing with migration. And you can calculate this by subtracting the crude death rate from the crude birth rate and dividing by 10. And finally, doubling time is the amount of time that it takes for a country's population to double. And I believe this is calculated by dividing 70 over like the rate of population growth, but you don't need to know that for the exam. I am actually not sure about this question. If you use an abbreviation, will graders still give full credit? My teachers, just in my experience, always told me to write it out, just so that you express to readers that you know really what you're talking about. You don't want to leave anything up to chance on FRQs. Even if it saves you a second, I would say it's worth writing it out, just so you're sure that readers know what you're talking about, because you do know what you're talking about, and you don't want it to come down to a silly little abbreviation that costs you a point. Okay, now I think we're ready to go on to the demographic transition model. Yay. Okay, so the demographic transition model is a cornerstone of this course. You want to always be thinking about it and relating things back to it, even as we talk about other units. So a brief definition: the DTM, or demographic transition model, is a model that looks at a country's population trends, taking birth rate in relation to death rate as time and economic development progress. That's something that the demographic transition model kind of assumes, that time and economic development are going to continue and economic development is going to increase. The DTM is broken up into 5 stages. Some may argue that the 5th stage doesn't exist, but I'm going to tell you that it does exist. And again, it compares the country's population's birth rate and death rate to make conclusions and predictions about the total population of a country. So I think we should get into stage 1. Obviously, each stage has its own kind of boring name. This one's called the high stationary stage because the population isn't growing, but birth rate and death rate are high. But I decided to give each of the stages my own nickname because I thought that was fun, and hopefully it can help you remember. So the stage 1 in my book is called Nasty, Brutish, and Short, because life in stage 1 is kind of nasty, brutish, and short. If you're taking AP Gov, that's actually the first line from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. If you don't know what that means, no problem. Just know that stage 1 kind of sucks to live in. So the characteristics of stage 1 are that the birth rate is really high, but the death rate is also really high. And that means that because birth rate and death rate are relatively the same, the population is not going to be growing. And that also means that your quality of life is pretty poor and your life expectancy is pretty low because the death rate is so high. And disease and lack of advanced medical care really account for the high death rate and low life expectancy. Like, think about it. At any moment, you're really susceptible to disease. Anything could kill you that now, at least in more developed countries, we have vaccinations for. At any moment, you can be killed by a wild animal. stage 1 is not typically a fun stage to be living in. And generally, we consider that there are no countries in stage 1 today. So if you're asked on the exam what countries are in stage 1, that's a trick question because there are no modern countries in this stage. However, there are some indigenous societies that are in this stage and they're doing well. One example is the Sentinelese people in the Indian Ocean, and you're actually not allowed to contact them because our diseases that we have immunity from would actually kill them. So there are some people living in stage 1, but no modern countries today. And if you have any questions about the stages, put them in the chat, but I'm going to move on to stage 2 right now. So stage 2, I've nicknamed the techno baby boom, which doesn't have anything to do with like a post-war population boom, but it does have to do with a large population growth. And this is because in stage 2, we have a high birth rate because the birth rate has not declined yet, but we have a decreasing death rate. And this is caused by industrialization and medical advancements, or the medical revolution. And therefore, technological advancements are causing population growth, or a baby boom. And so it's really important for you to know that industrialization is what causes the shift from stage 1 to stage 2. And this results in more efficient food production, which leads to better food security. And infant mortality rate decreases because we have better access to medical care, and medical care is of a higher quality now, or at least actually exists now. And as a result, life expectancy is going to increase. I said that the infant mortality rate is going to decrease, which is true, but it's still relatively high, and it will continue to decrease as we move along in other stages. And just to reiterate one more time, because death rate is decreasing, but birth rate is still the same, population is going to grow because more people are being born in a year than are dying. And some examples of countries in stage 2 today include Pakistan, Bolivia, and Uganda. And there are other examples, but these are just some for you to think about right now. Okay, on to stage 3. Stage 3, I have nicknamed pop culture because cultural changes are what account for the shift between stages 2 and 3. The shift between stages 1 and 2 was technological. This one is going to be cultural. And when I mean cultural changes, I mean increased educational opportunities and economic opportunities, in part due to higher education, are available for women. And this means that because women are working and they're being like girl bosses, they don't always have time to have as many kids as they used to have. So this means that total fertility rate, or the number of babies on average being born to a woman, is going to decrease in a country. Urbanization also impacts this and impacts how many children a woman is going to have. Because if you're working in a rural area, if you're not working in an urban area, you're going to need to have a lot of kids to help you on the farm. But in urban areas, you don't need as many kids because you don't need to make your own food. And so having as many kids is going to be more of an economic burden than it is going to be an economic benefit. And that's another reason why TFR is going to decrease. So taking all of this into consideration, we now know that the birth rate is going to decrease for cultural reasons, and death rate, which was already decreasing in stage 2, is going to continue to decrease a little bit more. This means that the population overall is still going to grow a little bit, but it's more moderate this time. It's not as uncontrolled and as wild as it was in stage 2, if that makes sense. And finally, some examples of countries in stage 3 today include South Africa, India, and the United Arab Emirates. Okay, we're more than halfway done with the DTM. On to stage 4. So stage 4 is characterized as being stable, which is why I called it the stable one. It's a bit of a boring name, but it's kind of a boring stage if you're not in, population crisis, if you're stable. So you might notice that stage 4 is sort of similar to stage 1 in that there's pretty much zero population growth going on, but this is because there's a low birth rate and a low death rate this time, as opposed to stage 1, which had a high birth rate and a high death rate. And the reasons that stage 4 are the way that it is can be attributed to a continuation of the technological and cultural shifts that were occurring in earlier stages. Women are going, and people in general are going to continue to have access to higher education. Medical care is going to continue to advance, and people are going to get married later, they're going to have fewer children, and typically the total fertility rate, or the number of kids being born to a woman, is going to approach or be around the replacement fertility rate. And replacement fertility rate is essentially just how many kids you're going to need to have in order to keep the population the same, which is 2.1. So think about if you have like 2 parents and the parents have 2 kids. When the parents die, the 2 kids are going to kind of take the parent's spot in accounting for that population. So you're going to have no population growth. 2 people die, 2 people are born, no population growth. The reason why replacement fertility rate is 2.1 is just to account for variability in case an accident happens, you have like a buffer so that the population isn't decreasing. But in stage 4, we have ZPG, zero population growth. Total fertility rate is around replacement fertility rate. Population isn't growing, it's stable, a little boring. Examples of countries in stage 4 today would be the USA, Canada, France, Argentina, typically very developed countries. And finally, this leads us to stage 5. So stage 5, I have called the shrinky dink, because the population in stage 5 is actually shrinking. And this is because the birth rate is lower than the death rate, which means we're having negative population growth. And this is happening in some very developed countries, including Japan, Italy, and Germany. And this means in stage 5, countries are typically characterized by having a high dependency ratio, meaning that the people who are not in the workforce, there's a high ratio between people who are not in the workforce, too young, and typically, in this case, way too old to work, compared to those who are able to work. And yeah, that's about it for the DTM. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat right now. I'll give you some time to do that, but I think we're ready to move on to more themes within population. What is the infant mortality rate of all 5 stages? I actually can't tell you like the exact numbers off the top of my head, because it changes like typically country to country within like each stage of the DTM, but typically the IMR is going to decrease and get like very low as you go through the 5 stages. So IMR is going to be highest in stage 1. Stage 2, it's going to go down a little bit. It's going to go down even more in stage 3. It's going to be pretty low in stage 4. And then stage 5, it's going to be the lowest of all, even though the birth rate in stage 5 is going to also be pretty low. Okay. Any other questions?
There was one thing I would like to mention. So there is terms that we use in APQ and geography as geographers, which is LDCs and MDCs. The LDCs are less developed countries and MDCs are more developed countries. So let's say you get an FRQ and you might like forget what stage France is in. You can be like, it's a more developed country, so you can put this more developed country. Or if you know like a country, or if you forget, let's say it's like Yemen, but you remember it's a less developed country, you can mention it like that, and that might just help you be saved by the bell in case you forget what stage it's in.
The question on the screen right now, aren't most countries in Africa in stage 2? Generally, like sub-Saharan African countries are typically, but it's like, I can't really use that as a rule of thumb, because like I said, South Africa, because of its history of like colonization and like European influence there, is stage 3, as well as some Northern African countries because of, oil there and their relations with others, and also colonization. They are more in the stage 3 as opposed to stage 2. But there are many sub-Saharan African countries in stage 2. All right, I think we're good to move on now, because we have plenty more to talk about in population and migration. So I'm going to briefly talk about the epidemiological transition model, just touch on it briefly. Basically, what this looks at is how people are dying across the stages. A little morbid, but so I think it's interesting. So in stage 1 and stage 2, you're having infectious diseases really be the cause of people's deaths. And this is because, especially in stage 1, there's not great medical care, but in stage 2, the death rate or deaths caused by infectious diseases are decreasing a little bit because of, like I said, the medical revolution. In stages 3 and 4, people are living longer. And this means that they're living long enough that they're being killed by things that couldn't kill them before. And this means like cardiovascular diseases or cancer or diabetes or obesity, things that take time to develop. So because you live longer so you can have more health problems. These health problems that are onset later in life are typically what's going to kill you in stages 3. And then stage 4, we sort of have mechanisms or ways to treat these degenerative diseases, but it's still typically what's going to get you. And stage 5, we have the potential resurgence of infectious diseases due to globalization. And one great example of that would be COVID-19. Because we're all so interconnected, we have this re-emergence of an infectious disease, not a chronic disease, that got so many people over the past like 2-3 years. Okay, I think that's enough of DTM and ETM. Time to move on to Malthus. So Thomas Malthus was an economist, a clerk, a geographer guy, and he was really concerned about population growth, and specifically what happens in stage 2 of the DTM. And to remind you, that means that death rate is decreasing, but birth rate's still the same. So population is like booming. It's going crazy. And he was like, hey, at some point, we're going to reach carrying capacity, or what he called a breaking point. At some point, our population is not going to be able to be sustained by the land. And this is because he thought that agricultural growth, or the rate at which we could produce food, grows arithmetically. So it's like a straight line, as you can see on the graph. But population grows geometrically, or kind of like exponentially. So it's like curved. And the more people are being born, the more and more population is going to grow. And so he says that at some point, we're going to reach this breaking point because population grows faster than food grows. Our production of food can grow. And so he says that in order to prevent this from happening, there are a few things that can happen. We can have preventative checks like celibacy or contraception, and like delaying marriage so that population and birth rate is going to decrease. Or something that can get us if we don't act preventatively is positive checks like war, plague, or famine. Especially famine will happen after you feel the effects of exceeding carrying capacity. There are some criticisms of Malthus. Some of them, the fact like straight up that he was sort of classist because he really advocated for celibacy to occur like only in the impoverished areas and not so much in upper class. And so And he also, some people say that he also failed to account for technological advancements, or the fact that as time continued, yes, population is going to grow, but technology is also going to advance, and we're going to have different ways of coping with this and of using our natural environment to our advantage. And he also couldn't foresee the changes between stages 2 and 3 of the DTM, that the rate of natural increase is going to decrease after family size decreases when people move from rural to urban areas, when urbanization occurs, because people aren't going to need a bunch of kids to work the farms when you live in a city. And finally, the cornucopian view, which is a school of thought that criticized Malthus, says that it takes a positive approach to population growth. And they essentially assert that, hey, it's not a bad thing that so many more people are being born, because with more people being born, we have more innovative minds to help us cope with, how we can use the land around us and how we can innovate technology to use it to our advantage. Despite these criticisms, some neo-Malthusians in about the 60s, 70s, when at least in America and the Western world, there was starting to be an era of environmental consciousness, they were concerned with the depletion of natural resources as a result of overpopulation occurring. And we're nearing the end of our population part, but population policies are another standard that you're going to need to know for the exam. So first, why do governments care? Why do they even bother to implement population policies? It all comes back to this idea of sustainability, that a government is concerned with the perpetuation of the people because they want their country to continue. And this means that they want to have enough resources to continue on for the future while also like meeting the needs of the current people. So if you have too many people, that's hard to do. But if you have too few people, like you're not going to have a country left over. And so population policies can be broken down into two groups: pronatalist policies and antinatalist policies. And the aim of pronatalist policies, you can think of pro as like good. They want to increase a country's birth rate. And so ways to do this are making it easier for people to have kids. The like providing them with good like maternity leave and free baby care products, tax exemption, subsidies, other benefits for larger families. And France is one example because they give monetary incentives for having kids. Secondly, antinatalist policies are really aimed to decrease a country's birth rate. And this is typically what happens with countries in like stage 2, trying to get out of stage 3 of the DTM. And some of these antinatalist policies can include access to contraceptions, or can be a little bit more extreme, like sterilization, or like family planning clinics to help families hopefully like decrease the number of kids that they want to have. One example of China's one example of an antinatalist policy is China's one-child policy, which has been repealed. But when it was happening, the Chinese government said that you can only have, one child per couple, and this led to a crisis that they now have, where they, one, don't have enough women in their population, and two, don't have enough working people essentially to kind of support their aging population. So just know that also any pro or antinatalist policy that's implemented by government is going to have ramifications. Okay, I think we're good to go on that one. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat or want me to slow down or speed up. But that's it for the population part of this, and now we're on to migration. Okay, and also if we need a break, chat host, you can also let me know. But I'm going to move into migration while I can. So migration is the movement from one place to another, and this can be done kind of in 2 ways, or break it up into 2 ways. Immigration starts with an I. It's a good mnemonic, so people are moving in. People are coming into a country to live permanently. Emigration happens when you leave a country. So emigration starts with E, and I want you to remember exit. Emigration means exit. People are leaving a country to live somewhere else permanently. Okay. And a migrant is just someone who does the migration thing. They move from one place to another temporarily. So I'm seeing that you guys want a break. So before we go any further in the migration stuff, I think this is a good place to stop. I can put up the timer, go to the bathroom, go eat snacks, catch up on your notes, and I'll see you guys in about 5 minutes. Okay, so, oh no. Welcome back from your break. We're going to continue to talk about migration. So this is where we were. Okay, so migration, when you think about migration, you probably think about push and pull factors. And it's pretty simple. So push factors are things that push you away or motivate you to leave the country that you're currently in. And this can include things like war or political instability. Like if you're part of a religious minority that's being persecuted, you're obviously going to want to leave if you can. Other things can include environmental or climate factors like famine or drought, which can lead to poverty. But also with that is a lack of economic opportunities. If you can't make enough money to sustain yourself, you might want to leave. Pull factors, on the other hand, are things that make the country that you want to move to really attractive. So conversely, this can be political stability. Let's say that a country has a relatively stable democracy. Like that's a pretty attractive factor. Natural resources and a good stable climate. Economic opportunities, that's bolded because economic opportunity is the number one people migrate. And a good climate, like I said, and educational opportunities so that you can get those jobs and make money. And the chat, I want you to think about a push factor and a pull factor of where you live right now. So for me, I would say that a push factor would be the high price of living. It's really nice to live where I live, but it costs a lot of money and taxes are pretty high. So that could be something that motivates people to want to leave. Pull factors or something that's attractive about the area that I live would be the good climate. It doesn't snow here. It's really sunny all the time. I think that would be a pull factor. So if you want to type in the chat a push and pull factor of your hometown or where you are right now, that would be great. And moving on, intervening obstacles are environmental or cultural factors that like prevent migration. And these can be thought of as negative. Obstacle has a negative connotation. And I want you to remember that intervening obstacles are negative because they stop you from going where you want to go. Examples can be like environmental. It can be a flood or an environmental disaster that stops you from being able to leave or being able to enter the country that you want to go to. Or it can be political things or logistical things like a lack of documentation. It's actually really hard to immigrate to the US because of the number of like documents required. But if you're a refugee, let's say, like fleeing a country that has political instability, you typically are not going to have time to take your documents with you. And so this lack of documentation can be an intervening obstacle in your migration journey. On the other hand, intervening opportunities are positive. Opportunity has a positive connotation, and I want you to remember that intervening opportunities are positive. Intervening opportunities cause someone to stop migrating to their original destination. So let's say that I'm doing step migration. I'm moving from rural China to suburban Canada to an urban area, Boston, in the United States. But along my way, while I'm in suburban Canada, I get a job offer, which would be an intervening opportunity. And it's really great because I don't finish the rest of my migration journey. I stop where I'm at because I have this attractive job offer and I want to make money. So that's an example of an intervening opportunity. And both impact migration. Next, we're going to talk about Ravenstein's laws. Ravenstein was a German geographer looking at patterns among migrations and why people migrate, where they migrate, and why they migrate, where they migrate. And I will let you read the 10 laws that I've listed out here. I would say that if you can, memorize them. But what's more important is that you have a general understanding of these patterns that he's talking about, and then you can like apply them to different trends in migration. And I would say that sometimes if you just take a second to break them down, it can kind of be almost like common sense, or you can think about them like logistically. Like men are more likely to travel long distances, number 8, because they don't have families to take care of. And see, also the majority of migrants are adults because they have like the, at least in some cases, economic means to. And their children, it's a lot harder for them to migrate by themselves because, you know, they're dependent upon other people. If you do remember something from Ravenstein's laws, I want you to remember number 10, which I touched upon earlier, the idea that most people migrate for better economic opportunity. Okay. Now we're going to talk about forced versus voluntary migration. I know that this can be a little bit confusing for some people, but I'll try to break it down simply. Forced migration, which refugees and asylum seekers and internally displaced persons all fit into. Forced migration occurs when you don't have a choice in leaving your home country. You are forced out of it. Whereas voluntary migration, if something is voluntary, that means that it's an act of your own volition. You're choosing to leave your home country. So this is the main difference between the two. So there are a few types of each. So for forced migration, you can be a refugee when someone is forced to cross an international boundary to escape persecution, natural disaster, war, etc. When you don't have a choice, when you're forced to leave your home country and then cross over into an international boundary. So one example of this would be some refugees that were created due to the civil war conflict in Syria. And so let's say that you are a Syrian refugee forced to flee your home country and you end up in a lot of them ended up in Turkey, actually. You've crossed many international boundaries, and that would make you a refugee. IDPs, or internally displaced persons, are very similar to refugees, but as the name states, that they're internally displaced within their home country. So they're forced to leave their home. They're not given a choice, really, but they don't cross over an international boundary. One example of this would be IDPs that are influenced by the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Some people that have been attacked in urban areas of Ukraine having to flee and move to other places within the country, but not cross over international boundaries, they would be IDPs. On the other hand, voluntary migration, again, occurs when you are given a choice to leave, when you voluntarily leave your home. There are many different types. They can kind of be confusing, but I'm going to give you the rundown on the ones listed right here. So step migration, if you think of like a ladder or a staircase, occurs in steps or occurs in stages. And that means that you're kind of hopping around from one place to another systematically, and eventually you will end up in your end destination, but you have many stops along the way. So for example, this is actually the step migration that my family took, not me, but like my grandfather took. He moved from Trinidad to Canada and then finally to the US. And he had an intermediate stop in Canada along the way, an intermediate step, where he ended up in the US, his final destination. Chain migration, it sort of sounds similar like step and chain. And so it can be easy to get these confused. And people get them confused a lot. But chain migration is what happens when legal immigrants sponsor a family member's immigration in their home country to come to the US. And so while like in America, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was implemented in the 19th century, if you were Chinese and a legal resident, there was a way for your family to still come over, and it was through chain migration. And if you were a legal resident, you could sponsor a family member to come over, and that was one of the few ways that Chinese migration was still able to occur. Transnational is kind of what it sounds like, trans like across, and national, nations, countries. It's crossing an international boundary, moving from one country to another. Transhumanist, this is maybe like the oddest one in here. It's seasonal migration with livestock, and you might hear a little bit more about it when we talk about agricultural land use in another unit. Guest worker is typically temporary migration when migrants move from their home country to typically a more developed country to serve as like physical labor or do specific work there. And usually the government will implement certain policies like the Barcero program in the United States, which was active 1942 to 1964 due to a labor shortage in which the American government essentially sponsored Mexican immigrants to migrate, or yes, Mexicans to legally like immigrate and work temporarily, especially doing agricultural work. And finally, rural to urban is another type of migration that occurs. We talked about it in the transition between stage 2 and 3 of the DTM, but that's when people move from rural areas to urban areas. They move from farms to cities for a number of reasons, many of which are economic. Okay. Finally, I believe this is the last slide of content. We have the consequences of migration that are important to know. There are certainly more than this, but these are the greatest hits, and they have some important vocabulary. So assimilation and acculturation talk about the relationship between the migrant and in context of the society that they're coming into. So when a migrant moves to a new country, when they immigrate, when they assimilate, that means that they kind of cast aside their past culture, the culture of their home country, and adopt the culture of the new society that they're living in. There's not a lot of mixing going on. It's really throwing away one to adopt the other, to fit the status quo that's been established. And this can include like learning a new language or learning a state language, for example, and not using a mother tongue as often. Conversely, acculturation is more of a blending that happens, a conversation between an immigrant's home culture and the new culture that they are coming into. And so this happens when the immigrant will retain some parts of their home culture, but also will mix it with what is existing in the area that they move into. It's not one or the other, it's not black or white, but the culture becomes more gray and there's a give and take. Xenophobia is the phenomenon of like hatred of foreigners or immigrants due to like prejudice or stereotypes, and this can be difficult for immigrants if they do face xenophobia in their process of assimilating or, you know, just having a home in a new country due to these cultural factors. And it's also important to note that that when considering consequences of migration, economic growth is something that's really important. This is due to the idea of remittances, and sometimes migration, especially of like guest workers, can ultimately be a net positive good for the home country's like economic well-being. And this is because the idea of remittances is that foreign workers will send money back home. So if they move and immigrate temporarily to a new country, they're provided work and they send the extra money home to their home country to support their family. That helps the economy of their home country. And finally, it's important to note that countries in stages 4 and especially stage 5 of the DTM need immigrants because their birth rate is so low that they will not be able to sustain like a population for the future if they don't have like immigration policies that typically like welcome other people and make it relatively easy for people to immigrate. And an example of this kind of going wrong in the stage 5 of the DTM is Japan. Japan, it's like probably the hardest country to obtain citizenship in. And it's really rough experience to immigrate there just because they are so homogenous, and again because it's really difficult to naturalize there. And as a result, this is why we see Japan on almost in the future a brink of a population collapse, because they, with their birth rate being so low due to other cultural factors, they're not going to have enough people to sustain the population for Japan to continue to be, you know, a substantial country. And this is in part due to because of immigration policies, and a consequence of strict immigration policy is that population when in stages 4 and 5 will continue to decrease. All right, so that is it for Unit 2. Thank you for sticking with me. The big ideas that we covered are population and migration. So within that is population distribution, why people live the way they live and where they live, population pyramids and the DTM, and population policies, and migration causes and consequences. So if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead and type them in the chat. A few will appear on the screen because I want to know what I can help further prepare you guys for and what I can re-explain, if anything, to help you further.
Hey guys, so one thing I wanted to mention was that I was seeing a lot in the chat is if you had trouble like taking notes or keeping track of notes, or you want to find a different way to take notes, we actually created review packet that you can find. Actually, someone sent the link in the chat. And for the next units, you can use it and you can follow along, and it'll help a lot because that will help you retain the information a lot better.
Yeah. And if you want, after like the replay of this is going to be posted immediately and you have access to the slides too. So you can go through at your own pace through the slides or the replay and then fill out the outline that's provided. Okay, but if we have no questions, I guess we can move on to our practice quiz. Oh, okay. What is the best stage for a country to be in? I think that that's like very subjective and there's no like right answer, I guess. And my answer might be like a little Eurocentric, a little like core country centric, but I would say at least like if you're considering stability, stage 4 is kind of where you want to be because you have good, you have low birth rates, but you also have low death rates. You have good access to medical care. Population isn't growing a ton. And so you're not feeling the effects and the environmental constraints of a rapidly growing population, but it's kind of subjective, you know. Okay. Any more questions? If not, we're going to go on to our practice quiz. All right. I think, oops, I'm going to share the practice quiz now, and I'll give you the chance to join. Okay.
One thing I would say is for the people using like the Princeton Review, usually the questions there are going to be harder than the ones on the test. I remember my teacher, the tests were so hard, but then when I took the actual exam, wasn't as hard. But yeah, the difficulty is always going to be a little bit harder. So just know that because it helps you prepare better for the test.
Okay, so you can go ahead and join using the QR code there. And then once we have enough people, we're going to get started. Should I play the music? Just kidding. I can't hear the music, so that's okay. We can do this in silence. You can imagine the great music. So we're going to have about 10 practice questions here. And after that, we're probably going to go into some FRQ review. And we'll see how much time we have left, but we might have to call it a night there. We do have some additional MCQ in the slideshow if you want to look at that after the slides are posted, if we don't have time to get to them. Okay. Okay, so let's see. I'll wait until we have like 250 people and then we'll get started.
I think you can put the music with the little speaker button.
Okay, I'll try. Can you hear it?
No, I don't
Because I
hear
can't
it.
hear it. Okay, well, it's all right. We can imagine the music in our heads. Or I could sing for you guys. Just kidding, you wouldn't want that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the quiz. Okay. All right, or we can have Kahoot music. Okay, so first, which of the following factors could be considered a push factor?
Make sure you guys are answering the questions.
Yeah. I like the emojis.
Me too. They're cute.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and reveal the answer. Woo! Wow, you guys did so good, 98% correct. The push factor is B, religious persecution. You guys got it, but in case you didn't, it's because that's the only one that would motivate you to leave an area. The other three sound really appetizing, and they would entice you to move to an area, and that's a pull factor pulling you in. Push factor is pushing you out. Oh, the music came on, I think. Okay. 2, a population pyramid with a wide base represents what? I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer. Yay, you guys are crushing it. Okay, a population pyramid with a wide base represents a high birth rate. Remember, the lowest cohort or the base of a population pyramid is the youngest people. If it's super wide, then it means there's a lot of babies and high birth rate. Okay, what should a country invest in if they have a growing population? Oh, okay. I will turn down the music. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer. Yay, okay. So most of us got it. A country, okay, let me first start by defining a graying population. I may have mentioned it briefly earlier, but a graying population is a population that has typically an older population, typically stage 5, that there are more people in the post-reproductive ages than there are pre or reproductive ages. More old people than young people. And so this means that, consider this, what do you need when you have more old people? And I think that most of you got that C would be the best answer, because when you're old, you have a lot of health problems and you want to have healthcare to help mitigate or cope with those problems. I could see maybe not A, because typically education happens when you're young. If you're old, you really don't need education. I can see an argument to be made for B, you might need, more infrastructure or changes to infrastructure to increase accessibility for disabled people who become disabled later in life, but that's a little tangential of an answer, and I think healthcare is the best answer given what we have. All right, ready to move on? Okay. The youthful population has what characteristics? All right, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer. So a youthful population has C, high fertility rates and high dependency ratio. This is because a young population, if you think back to more stages like 1, 2, a little bit of stage 3, but mostly stages 1 and 2, the number of children being born to a woman is very high because, you know, lack of medical care, contraceptive aren't widely used, but also you're living in a rural area and you want to have a lot of kids to help on the farm. It also means that you're going to have a high dependency ratio. Remember that dependency ratio is the number of dependents, or people too young, in this case, or too old to work, compared to the number of people who are working age. And if you have a young population, that means that a lot of people are too young to work. They're dependents, so dependency ratio is going to be high. Okay. Right, next question. In stage 4 of the DTM, death rates are okay, I'm going to reveal the answer. Nice. In stage 4 of the DTM, death rates are low. Yeah, they're low, just like birth rates, and so population growth is low. Which of these countries is in the early stages of the DTM? All right, I'm going to reveal the answer. Wow, you guys killed it. 100% correct response rate. You are right. Bolivia is the country here that's in the earliest stage of the DTM. Type in the chat right now what the other countries are in. Hopefully you guys can know. Okay, next question. How did the DTM model affect the Malthusian theory? All right. I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer now. This question might have been a little tricky, but that's okay. I'll explain it. So, how did the DTM affect Malthusian theory? The correct answer is C. Population did not continue to rise at the same rate. The reason why it's not A, which is the second most chosen answer, countries in higher stages made more food, that's actually a criticism or a counter to Malthusian theory. The idea that the rate of food production actually increases with population growth and as technology increases. Let's see. Not a lot of people answered B or D, but it's C because basically what Malthus said is like population, when looking at stage 2, population is going to increase when birth rates stay the same but death rates decrease due to medical advancements. And this rate of population growth is going to be bigger or faster than food, which goes arithmetically, and thus we're going to have a problem. Okay, next question. We're almost done. What is a downside of anti-natalist policies? I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer now. The correct answer is D. A downside of anti-natalist policies is aging populations. And we can look at like China, for example, right now, where because of their like the one-child policy that they implemented, among, you know, other reasons, they don't have enough young people that were being born that are now like at working age to support the population that of older people that was much larger because there were no anti-natalist policies going on when they were being born. So ultimately, when you decrease the number of babies being born, or you decrease the birth rate, that leaves everyone who was born before in an area of a larger birth rate to grow old and not have enough people like working to support them. And you have an aging population where the average age of the population is, you know, relatively older. Yes. Okay, second to last question. What are the economic consequences of a growing population? So like what we just talked about. I kind of wish I could have this music playing when I take my AP exams. Like, oh, I am seeing the chat wants the music louder. Okay, I'll turn it up for our last question. I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer. The one consequence of a growing population is a high dependency ratio. And again, dependency ratio is the ratio of people who are too old, in this case too old, or less so too young to work compared to the number of working people in a population. So if you have a lot of old people who can't work and are needing to be supported by a smaller group of working age people, you're gonna run into some issues. Yeah, the reason why it's not a low employment rate is because it's not that people are necessarily of working age or not being employed. It's that the retired people are needing to be supported by the working age people, and that leads to a high dependency ratio. And in fact, there's not necessarily like a low employment rate per se. It's just that you're going to need to start like outsourcing labor, and you might need to change your immigration policies and have guest workers come over because you don't have enough people working to sustain the economy. But I could see how A is maybe a feasible answer, just not the best answer considering what we're talking about. Okay, last question. Are you excited, guys? I'll turn the music up for you. Let me know if you want it louder. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and reveal the answer. Sorry to interrupt the music. What poses a great challenge for immigrants wanting to immigrate from Africa to Europe? And this would be an example of an intervening obstacle, which would be the Mediterranean Sea. Just like knowing general like geography and like physical geography, the layout of like what environmental factor physically would cause a challenge to that. That would be the Mediterranean Sea there. Yes. Okay. So thank you all for coming along with us for our practice quiz. We're now going to do some FRQ practice in the last like 15 minutes of this session. And let me share that. Sorry, you don't get another break. Okay.
Okay, wait, how do you make the screen like a little bigger?
Uh-oh.
Okay, there we go. So
There
now
we
we're
go.
going to be the FRQ, which is also known as the free response question. And one thing that my teacher taught me and that now we're going to be teaching you here at Fiveable is that different verbs are going to mean different lengths of sentences or what you really have to focus on. So for example, we have identify. If you get identify, that's just one complete sentence. Like, don't waste your time trying to write 4 sentences, 5 sentences. If you're going to do identify, do 1 to 2 sentence max. Describe is 1 to 2 sentences with a little extra information. And then explain will be more of a format paragraph. So when it asks you to explain, you really want to be thorough because they are asking you to answer the question thoroughly compared to identify, which is literally just one thing. Then we have discuss, and discuss is write about multiple perspectives, similarities, or differences. Discuss is not going to come up as much, but if you do get discuss, just make sure that it's like pro and con, or what are the similarities of one thing, or what are the differences. If you are confused on any of this, you can ask in the chat, but if not, we're going to move on to the FRQ. So I'm going to ask for compare. Usually you don't have to worry about that. Compare is mainly just similarities and differences, but the ones that are mostly going to come up are going to be identify and describe. That's one thing that my teacher told me when I was in class, that identify, describe are always going to come up. Okay, so how we're going to do the FRQ is that we're going to go by A, B, and C. So we're going to do A, then I'll explain the answer, and Jessica will also explain the answer, and then we're going to move on to B. But instead of just sending it in the chat once you write it, just hold on until we tell you when to send it, because you don't want to spoil the answers for others if you already know. Okay, so the question asks, infant mortality varies widely around the world and is affected by complex real-world characteristics. The infant mortality rate is a key demographic indicator that can be used to assess social, economic, and other conditions at multiple geographic scales. So the first question is going to ask you, identify the predominant ranges of the infant mortality rate found in South Asia and in Western Europe. So remember what we talked about in Unit 1. This is also correlating with Unit 2. But remember, when you're the first thing you want to do when you get this type of FRQ is that you want to analyze the map. So when you're analyzing the map, make sure what type of map it is. So we can tell this is a thematic map. And there's also the key. The key is going to help you. It's literally going to answer this question for you. So honestly, this question is pretty easy once you look at the key. And it asks, identify the predominant ranges of the infant mortality rate found in South Asia and in Western Europe. So just write one sentence and see how many are found in South Asia and how many are found in Western Europe. It's going to be numbers. So we'll give you a few, like 10, 15 seconds. No, because you have to analyze it, so like a little bit more. We are not going to be, we're going to be doing all the parts. Okay, I think now is a good time to release the answer. I will put the music when we're answering the questions. Okay, so for number 1, when you're looking at the map, for example, let's say you're looking at the map and you want to see for Western Europe and South Asia. The first thing is, that's why it's important to generalize where the regions are. So think of the continent Asia and think, what's the southernest part of Asia? And you can see that this is where India is. And realize what color it's shaded. So from we can tell, South Asia is shaded in the range of 30 to 59 in the infant mortality rate. So for the first one, the predominant ranges of the infant mortality rate for South Asia would be 30 to 59. But you also have to answer for Western Europe. So for Western Europe, which is the continent of Europe, and then to the west, you can see that it's white. There's not much color to it or different range of colors. And for that one, Western Europe would be in the infant mortality rate of 2 to 14. So I'm just going to highlight someone's question right here so you can see, because this person did answer correctly. Okay, that's good. So that's how you would be able to write the sentence. Literally, it's just one sentence. Okay, now I think we can move on to B. If you think we should move on to B, just put a thumbs up in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to move on to B. And remember, this says describe now. So you're going to have to use at least 1 to 2 sentences for this one. So it's going to require a little bit of extra information. The question asks, describe 2 economic reasons for the level of infant mortality rates in Western Europe. I'll give you about a minute or so to think of it and write your answer. Okay. I think that was enough time for B. Now we're going to discuss it. So going back,
sorry, I'll share. Do you want me to share the answers now?
the thing is, then we're spoiling C. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, then you can go for it.
Okay, thanks. We're gonna reveal all the College Board answers by the end, but I am gonna be telling you a lot of the College Board answers as I'm going along the question. So for B, it asks, describe 2 economic reasons for the level of infant mortality rates in Western Europe. So remember, the western part of Europe, the infant mortality rate was really low. It was, I believe, 2 to 14. And the reason, 2 economic reasons would be that first, it has universal health care. So everyone has access to healthcare. And another one is that people have access to education. So the people that are working, for example, in the hospitals have a better education. So in case of an emergency, they can help, especially mothers who are about to give birth or are dealing with any problems during their pregnancy or when the infant is born. After, I am going to be sharing with you what the College Board also suggests. This is one of the things that the College Board did say. But for now, we're going to move on to C. And the question for C asks, identify and explain a specific way in which, actually no, before I move on, can you guys send me a thumbs up in the chat to make sure you guys are understanding the content? If not, I'll just move on to C. Okay. So C asks, identify and explain a specific way in which each of the following 2 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are intended to affect infant mortality rates in a rural community in South Asia. So you don't really have to know about the United Nations Sustainable Goals, but these are just 2 of them that they're already giving you. So you just have to infer why quality education and clean water and sanitation are, for example, lowering infant mortality rates. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to answer this question.
I would recommend that you do know the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but we don't expect that you know them right now because they're not Unit 1 or Unit 2. They're mostly latter units like Unit 7. So if you were to attempt this question later after all of the Cram sessions, I think don't worry if you don't know it right now because you'll know it by the end of the 5 nights. Answer your question.
Sorry. Do you guys need more time? Someone puts this FRQ seems easy. Some of them might just be like that. Honestly, I remember taking the test and I was shook because the FRQs were pretty easy. I had studied though, a little bit, not gonna lie. Okay, I think this is a good time to stop. And I think we can move on to the slide now that we can reveal all the answers.
All right.
Okay, so now we're in the next slide, and this has revealed all the answers to you. So you are going to have access to these slides in case you want to go back into this FRQ later on or the recording of the Cram session. But for example, A, which we had explained, was South Asia was 30 to 59 and Western Europe was 2 to 14 after analyzing the map. For that one, for this FRQ, you definitely have to analyze the map because some FRQs you're going to get, you're not going to be given a visual. B was describing the 2 economic reasons. So B1 says, B1 through B5 shows you all the options that you can put. You don't have to put all of those, but those are what they would see would be true. So they can evaluate it and give you the points. So one of them is the universal healthcare or affordable healthcare. And then another one could be a higher standard of living, or that the education improves lives. And this also does kind of tie into C. Jessica, would you like to go over C?
I'll let you do it.
Okay. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the two of them that were listed was quality education and then the clean water and sanitation. So basically, you're like, one of the things I was reading, like, I'm sorry, I'm messing up on my words, but one thing that I was thinking when I first read C was how, if this is like after, how would that help after baby dies? But this is kind of like a precedent, for example. So how can improving the education then help lower infant mortality rate? So for example, education would be able to improve the lives and increase the skills for employment, which I had mentioned when we were talking about B, because people are more knowledgeable, and in case of an emergency, they can help save the life of an infant. And then from C1 through C7, you'll see why other reasons that education will help. And then clean water and sanitation would be that they have access to safe drinking water, and there will also be not as many breakouts of disease, especially in areas where the healthcare may not be very good. So here it says reduces water scarcity and improves sustainable water management, and also improves sanitation and hygiene. So that covers this FRQ. If you guys have any questions, make sure to put them in the little chat box. We can move on to question and answering, right? I mean, Q&A. I don't know why I say it the long way.
We can do some Q&A since we have like 3 minutes left. I'll skip through all this like MCQ practice that we had in the slideshow. If you want to look at it later, you're free to. They're just more practice. And yeah,
it includes the answers, so they'll have access to the answers too.
Mm-hmm. And so now you have some time to ask us questions. If you have any questions, we could quickly answer for you. And if you maybe need to be prompted on what to ask, oops. This is a list of everything that we covered in units 1 and 2 today. Yeah. Okay, so do all the FRQs have up to G, or may they be shorter?
Depends. Honestly, it depends. Some can go up to F, A, B, C, D, E, F. Not all of them will go up to G. Let me see. If you have a question, just put it in the little ask a question box so we're able to see it and highlight it. Someone asks here, what are the distortions on the Mercator map? On the Mercator map, just remember that it distorts the landmass since the latitude and longitude stay the same because it's used for navigation. So they want to keep the absolute location the same. Worry about. I don't think you need to worry about writing too much. Just make sure, like, if it asks to describe, max write like 3 to 4 sentences. Like, I don't think you need more than that. And also, it saves times when you're able to see which words help.
My advice is to answer the question thoroughly, but don't spend time saying things or answering things that you don't need to. So if it says describe, don't do anything more than describe. Like, if you accidentally explain, like, it's okay. As long as everything you say is right, they're not going to take points off. But you're going to have a lot to write, so you want to manage your time well.
See,
You could probably do one more question.
Someone asks, how can we prepare for answering FRQs? Honestly, FRQs are random, so really just grasping the concepts of each unit or having a general idea, because most of the time these FRQs, just like the one we just had, it kind of mixed unit 1 and unit 2, so it's not always going, sometimes it might just be over one unit, but it might mix them. You just have to have a general understanding of each unit for the FRQ. Like, there's no really specific way of preparing. Just knowing also the key verbs that we gave you. So if you see identify, it's just one sentence. Describe 1 to 2 sentences. Just keeping that in mind. And you can go back in the slides and see the task verbs. Okay,
Alright.
I think sums it up. Yeah. You want to add in?
Nope, I'll just go to the end of our slideshow really quick. We want to remind you that we'll be here for 4 more nights going over the rest of the 7 units, as well as like more essential skills and summarizing what you need to know for the exam. It's been a pleasure to host for you tonight. We hope you learned a lot and that you come back tomorrow to learn even more. And finally, we'd like to remind you to think Fiveable and follow us on our socials here. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night. Reminder that you did it, you came here, you showed up on a Saturday night, you're doing this, you're going to do so good on the exam because you're spending time preparing, and that's exactly what you need to do to succeed.
And everyone, put in the chat a big thanks to Jessica, Kushi, Sylvia, Emily, and Cosette for helping tonight, and Amanda. They all were a big, big help.
Yes, don't forget to thank April as well.
Thank you guys for coming.